It is my pleasure to introduce our final speaker, Jay Golden, all the way from Bedford, Oregon in the United States, and founder of storytelling company Retellable. So Jay is a storytelling coach and guide to founders, innovators, and social entrepreneurs working in the realms of technology, tourism, energy, and food at companies such as Virtuoso, Google, and LinkedIn. He is also a world-renowned author and speaker, and we've brought him here today to help us better understand how to use stories to explain why they matter and how you can draw from your past and present to inform your future. Please give Jay a huge Australian warm welcome. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It is an immense honor to be here today. Thank you. Thank you for diving into this day with so many changes happening. And as I flew here, the long flight, I had a lot of things to think about, a lot of changes going on. But I didn't realize that one of the most surprising things about this conference is that it would make me really think about the fact that I still don't understand Aussie rules football. I went to a game, a match, a set. My first trip to Australia. I was just out of college. I had visions of sailing across the seas. I was going to travel the world and meet its people. And I ended up watching a St. Kilda match. Now, I understand it's one part basketball, one part American football, one part soccer football, that's what we call it, and about 6 parts Victorian bitter, and a meat pie. But I really had this great feeling about it because I was just able to stand up and cheer for the fact that I was in Australia. And that was my first stop. And coming back here is an immense experience. And as the other day I was in Sydney, and I was walking along, and I ended up at the Harbour Bridge. And it made me think of another moment. I was traveling there with some friends that I had met a long ways away. They said, hey, it's the 60th anniversary of the Harbour Bridge, and people are walking across, and this is a very rare occasion, and you should go. I was still young to my travels, and of course I would take this opportunity. And so they dropped me off near the Prime Minister's house, which I thought was cool, and didn't take my meeting, but that was all right. And so I set off with thousands of other people. The thing about it was that as we kept walking and I was waving to people, it got tighter and tighter, more and more closed in, to the point where I realized that I could no longer move my arms as I was walking along. I was shoulder to shoulder, and soon I was rib to back, very respectfully, very close to my neighbors. And it became clear to us that they actually had people walking from both sides of the bridge. I was trying to stay on the left side, no, stay to the left. That's how you do it here, stay to the left. But we were held there, and I started to get a little scared. And I thought this would be a big adventure, what a great thing to do. But I don't know if you've ever felt that kind of feeling where you can't go anywhere. So I just want to hold that for a second, and I'll come back to it. But this feeling of being very, very stuck reminds me of another story. It's a story of a young man who enters into an unknown realm. His name is Prince Five Weapons. This is a story that I learned from the great philosopher Joseph Campbell. Prince Five Weapons got his name Because, you can imagine, he was expert in 5 weapons: the sword, the bow and arrow, the club, the axe, and the spear. He was an expert warrior. Now he came upon this forest, and as he did, the villagers nearby said, "Do not go into that forest. There is a terrible ogre there, and if you do, you will certainly die." Prince Five Weapons, as bold as he was, walked right into that forest. Pay that no mind. I am Prince Five Weapons, and I will face any ogre. A little boy came up to him and said, "But you might never come out." Pay no mind. A little part of him said, "Gosh, they really were pretty serious about this ogre thing," but he kept going. And as he walked deeper into the forest, he began to see the devastation. He began to see the crushed trees, the fallen trees, the territories that had been smashed. And in time, he began to hear the crushing and the terrible breaking of branches, and he came upon something unlike he had ever seen. This ogre was as big as a house. It had hair all over, huge eyes, arms as big as tree stumps. And it said to the prince, "Who are you? I destroy everyone I see." And Prince Five Weapons said, "I am Prince Five Weapons, and you will not get me." And he pulled out his bow and his arrow, and he shot 1, 2, 10, 20. All these arrows, and they all got stuck in the big matted hair of this ogre. And he pulled out his axe, and he threw his axe, and it went right in the middle between his eyes, but it got stuck in the hair. And he threw his spear, and it got stuck in the hair. And he took out his sword, and he ran up, stabbed it, but more hair. And finally, the club, and it was all stuck in the hair. And Prince Five Weapons was in trouble, and he knew it. But he ran up, and he started hammering at the ogre, but his arm got stuck. And he started and his other arm got stuck. And he kicked, and he was headbutting, because that's all he had left. Now, I don't know about you, but there's moments like this where a person just doesn't know what's left to do. It's kind of days like this. You don't know what's left to do, and that was how this day was with Prince Five Weapons. And the ogre looked down and said, "What kind of man are you? Why are you not afraid of me?" And Prince Five Weapons knew that at this moment he had to say something important, but he didn't know exactly what it was. And so he went deep inside, and he realized. He said, "I have a thunderbolt inside my belly. And if you as much as bite my thumb, you will immediately perish. That is why I am not afraid." And the ogre looked at him, confused, and figured that he must be telling the truth. And he let him go. And in time, the prince and the ogre became friends. And the prince taught the ogre the ways of peace as he began to learn himself through this moment of contemplation of the thunderbolt. And in time, that prince became one of the early incarnations of the Buddha. Now, I come all this way to tell you this story because in my work as a storytelling coach, what I find is that we hurl our messages. We clobber with our data. We shoot our most critical information. We try over and over and over to find ways to get through to our audiences. But at the end of the day, so much of it is forgotten. That's the challenge with this time. And that's the main question that I come with you today, which is at the end of a long day, at the end of 100,000 words like you took in today, we're walking databases with 34 gigabytes of information, so much information. And the main question is this: what do we remember tomorrow? That is the foundation of retellable stories. A story that will be told, that will be retold and remembered tomorrow. I work with a lot of different people all over the world. Many of them get up on the stage every day. And their job is not just to share critical information. Their job is to share that which will be remembered, which matches to what they most deeply care about. And that's really what I want to offer to you. On a personal level, I know that you are all travelers, which is my favorite audience in the whole wide world. That's why when the world started going crazy and I started saying, am I going to travel to the other side of the planet to share something with this audience at this time? And this is the thing that I hope to impart to you, that your stories, your lived experience, the wisdom of your life from your travels, from your facing of challenges, is the most essential resource that you have as professionals. That's what I have to say. As you gather these resources, these essential insights, and you share them, especially at a time of challenge, especially when things feel stuck, that is what gives life to your conversations and what gives life to those around you. But why stories? Why not just the right message at the right time? Why not just the right information when they most want to hear it? I did a little study of travel, high-end travel advisors, frontline high-end travel advisors, and how they communicate and how travel companies communicate. And we asked the question, how memorable were your presentations? And the advisors thought that they were about a 5.8. Good, but could be better. The travel company executives thought they were more like a 7.1. The thing about this is that when the travel advisors were asked what they thought of the travel company executives, it was more like a 5.5. So you might feel like you've got it down in your presentations, but there are opportunities that your audience might be showing you. And this is what we're looking at when we talk about retellable stories. In the same study, we asked, can you name a travel company whose presentation was memorable? And 39% said yes. 61% said they couldn't name one. So how many of you give presentations? So the question is not, will you deliver the right information? The question is, will you be remembered tomorrow? And that is an ancient technology of storytelling. That is where storytelling fits in. So from a brain science perspective, stories release dopamine. Well-told stories, suspenseful, well-told stories release dopamine. Dopamine sparks learning and enhances connection. Cortisol is released, a little bit of stress, not too much stress, because too much stress, as we know, overwhelms us. But a little bit of stress brings us into a place of awareness. We pay attention more deeply. And oxytocin creates a deeper connection that seals the deal. Don't answer this question, but there was a study done by the University of California, Davis, that asked Trivial Pursuit questions, and they asked a Trivial Pursuit question, and they gave 15 seconds before they gave the answer. So they waited. The question is this. Don't answer if you know it. What is the largest island in Japan? Don't answer, don't answer, don't answer. During this time where people were waiting, they showed images of random faces in this study. 14, 15 seconds is a long time. It's kind of a little boring even. You're like, what? Come answer the question. Who knows the answer? Hokkaido. That's what the Trivial Pursuit said. They could have been wrong. Hokkaido. So the question is, why do we not give the answer right away? And that's because a little bit of suspense, not giving the answer right away, is what helps people to retain it. I've trained executives at Google and LinkedIn and Facebook, and they're always saying, no, quickly, you got to give it quickly. You've got 15 minutes. I want to know the information really fast. Well, that's fine. You can deliver the information really fast, but nobody's going to remember it. Sensory details anchor memory. 3 sensory details in your story, 3 different elements of the senses in your story, and you will connect them to a place in time that will enhance their memory. Last study was done in Princeton. They put 2 people in fMRI scanners, and one of them told another a story. What they found was that their brains were lighting up in the exact same place. When they stopped telling a story and actually changed the language, that connection stopped. So our brains actually sync with our audience when we're telling a story. We can draw them into a place. A few points about what a story is. A story is a journey. A story is a journey with a twist. And a story is a problem that makes us care. How do you make somebody care? You make them care by taking them on a journey that connects them to one of the special places or experiences that they might possibly understand. That's what a story does. It's not just a problem. It's not just, I stubbed my toe and that was a real bummer. That's what you tell your friends to get compassion, and that's really valuable. But that's not a story. A story is a problem approached in an interesting way that makes us care. Different kinds of stories. Origin stories. Now, origin stories that tell where you come from are not just origin stories of your companies, although those are really important. They're also of stories of you personally and where you came from and what you learned in your journey. Impact stories tell what you do today. The impact on your customers, the impact on those around you, the impact on your employees, and sometimes even those that you've taught. It could be the impact on your friends or your kids sometimes. Those stories are stories that help me. And stories of vision, stories that help us get through. How do stories work? You can't connect the dots looking forwards. You can only connect them looking backwards. So as we think of our own journeys and our own life experience, I believe that each of us can have 10 stories that we gather that deliver on our most critical lessons of our life. And we can attach those to the things that are most important to us. But you have to connect the dots. You have to take a moment to connect the dots. Talking about shapes of stories. Kurt Vonnegut said, a person gets in trouble and they get out of trouble. People love that story. They can't get enough of it. Somebody gets in trouble and they get out of trouble. Why do we love that story so much? So he drew this shape as the quintessential shape of what a story is. I began to see this story everywhere. Shapes of stories in nature, shapes of stories in the seasons, shapes of stories in the strands of DNA. The shape of the sun moving in a circle, or the shape of the earth moving in a circle around the sun. Except that the sun is moving, so it's more like the shape of the earth moving in a swirl, in a spiral around the sun. And that's where our stories come from. They come from that kind of a swoop. Person gets in trouble and a person gets out of trouble. The place where stories don't work is when they seem forced, when you deliver information too critically fast, when you skip a part, when you don't skip anything at all, when you share way too much information, where you get stuck in that problem, that place where you can't quite get out. That's not something that we remember. It's not something we're going to retell. It's not something we're going to retell tomorrow, because it's just being stuck in a problem. The problem is, with so much data, we have to have a way to contain it. And that's the task for today, is how do we contain our stories? I worked on this for a long time in writing my book. I spent years trying to map and come up with a framework that would help people to understand and shape a story that would cover all of these different aspects. Something for a keynote, something for a travel story, something at a business meeting. And so this is what I'm going to share with you right now. How do we get to retellable? A story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But it's a journey, right? We said a story is a journey. And you have to have change. You must have change in order to make the journey. And in fact, no change, no story. I'm often asking when I'm working with people about their stories, I'm saying, what is the change? Where is the critical piece of the change that your audience is going to remember that sets up the suspense? And sometimes it's not just one change. It might be 3 changes. And this is what the journey curve is. 3 main pivots. These are the things I want you to remember. If you forget everything else from what I just said, I want you to remember these 3 things. Then one day, until finally, and ever since then. Can you say it back to me? Then one day, until finally, and ever since then. This is the journey curve. It is a travel story. But it's a travel story that can be used for your keynotes, for your presentations, for your meetings, for your stories with your management, for your employees. Starts like this. Once upon a time, there's going to be a test. Once upon a time, every day, the world was like this. This is how the world was. Then one day, first key pivot. Because of that, and because of that, and this is the innermost cave. The innermost cave is the place where we don't know what's going to happen. It's a little bit of an innermost cave kind of week. A place where we don't know, but this is essential to every story. The innermost cave, the deep stories have a place of not knowing. And going from that place of not knowing into that place of knowing is what makes all of the difference. It's followed by that moment of insight, the until finally moment. Then you're on your way out, and ever since then. So that's the journey curve. Now, I'd like you to consider a moment that you got through. I'd like you to consider a moment that you got through a challenge. A challenge that is worth speaking to. And I want you to use the journey curve to get out of it. Think about how you got through. Usually the first one is right. If you don't know, then you can have somebody else go first. I want you to turn to a partner. We're going to have 2 minutes using these pivots, then one day, until finally, and ever since then. Turn to your partner, just one partner, not two partners. You're going to have 2 minutes to tell how you got through. Okay? How you got through. Ready? I'm going to ring the bell when it's time to change. I'm going to ring the bell. Okay, ready, begin. One more minute on the first one. Okay, round out your first story. Time to switch. Time to switch. Switching, keep going. The lightning bolt?
So that was what I was saying.
It turned off. I didn't forget about lightning bolt. 30 more seconds. 30 more seconds. "30 more seconds. You can wrap it up." Okay, either I'm losing my hearing or we're done. Once upon a time. Let's hear somebody heard a once upon a time. What's a once upon a time that you heard? Once upon a time? How the world was before. I heard one over here. I began and I had people sitting next to me. Then one day, let's hear a then one day that you heard. A then one day that you heard. Then one day, the chairman resigned. Getting to it. Another then one day? I cracked. This is good. See, we're getting into it. This is good for the times. Okay. Another then one day? One more. I got fired? How I got through. That's the theme. So, then one day, let's hear an innermost cave. What was an example of the innermost cave? The place of not knowing, the mystery, the unknown place. The thing you didn't know. It wasn't one of the cues. Let's hear an until finally moment. Until finally. I realized my friend's child was not being eaten by a shark. So just by the until finally moment, we can feel the landscape. So I'm going to guess that the innermost cave was, I thought that my friend's child was being eaten by a shark. That was the place of not knowing. Another until finally? Until finally that you heard or that you experienced? I need another until finally moment. I gave up on chasing my dream girl. Sorry, that was my Australia story. I thought you were stealing it. I gave up on chasing my dream job. Okay, one more until finally. One that you heard. Until finally, I decided to no longer be the victim of my story. Beautiful. Thank you. And ever since then, what was that? Ever since then, anything? Ever since then, I've been happy, right? The ever since then is the place where the change happens. We can't forget the change. Ever since then, I haven't looked back. That is such a good ever since then. Ever since then? Okay, so what I want to say about this is, having gone through this process thousands of times, that those three pivots, when you remember them, it doesn't have to be that you're getting ready to stand up on stage. It doesn't have to be that you're making a presentation. You might be sitting in the cafe, and you might hear a story, and you're saying, wait a second, that reminds me of a story that I had. And it gets you thinking. And you say, well, where was that until finally moment? Or you might hear somebody say, then one day, because that sets off a change. And as we go through our lives in these ways where we get in trouble and we get out of trouble, not with so much data that we can't gather it, but with one framed story, it becomes the incremental insight on which we stand. We stand on a collection of insights and lessons from our lives that inform who we are and what we do. Now, that, I believe, truly informs you in your work, especially at a time of great change. What can we rely on? I completely believe that you should develop all of the skills that you have always wanted to develop. But one of them is taking an opportunity to reflect on your own life lessons and your own stories and your own pivots in order to inform why you care about the things that you care about and why it matters what you do. it's good because everybody in here has great travel stories. So I believe in exploring and holding those. And then as you're approaching an opportunity to a teachable moment, an opportunity to share something with somebody else, or just an opportunity to remember your own challenges and how you got through, an opportunity sometimes to let go of a broken story and actually replace it with something that had some change to it. That is a rich opportunity that I believe everyone can endeavor into. And the journey curve is something that I believe can really help with that, because sometimes we don't know what the missing piece is. Where do you use these stories? You might use them in a management opportunity. You might use them in a presentation. Where else might you use a story? Where do you use stories now? If you start talking, it'll enliven you more. Social media, yeah, for opportunity to think about how you share these stories through social. It's also an opportunity to think, if you're going to share 20 stories through social, what's the greater story that you're telling? What else? Workshops, leading trainings, teaching your staff. I tell stories to my kids. Now my son, who's 14, still wants to hear stories every night. He's, now tell me a story. I'm like, how about when you're 16? At this point, I've used up all of the 14-year-old stories. But the opportunity is to look across your own life lessons and consider what ways you can apply them. And so presentations, you can tell a story at the beginning of a presentation to open up and create a connection in an authentic way that links to what you're talking about. So I want to speak for a moment about building a collection. I believe, again, that everyone can have 10 go-to stories. The go-to stories are the stories that you really can rely on whenever you're going to have a teachable moment, a management moment, a marketing moment, the stories that you know you can rely on. The stories, the beautiful story this morning about the mate song, the pivot in the mate song was so beautiful to me. This idea that the story was like this, but then the story became like this. This is something that's retellable. So your go-to stories, make a list, number 1 to 10, and consider what are those stories that you tell. And can you go back to the journey curve, go back to those 3 pivots, then one day until finally and ever since then, and create a change and create a different way of telling it. Your reserves are the stories that maybe you've tried, and I mean by tried, I mean it could have been at a dinner table. It could have been a couple of glasses of wine in, and you tried the story, and it didn't work. But if you go back to that story and you give it another run, and you look and you say, well, where's the change? Was there a once upon a time? Like, did it show how the world was before? Was there a moment where I really didn't know? Was there enough vulnerability in that story? And you can go back and you can revive it and bump it up to your go-to list. And then there's insights. I myself went on a journey where I took 30 days and I challenged myself to tell 30 stories, just to myself. I scanned my life, the stories that I hadn't told, and I looked through and I said, well, what about that story? What about that Aussie Rules game? Was there anything there? No, I don't know what the change is, but maybe one day I'll be able to talk about it. What about that sailing trip? Was there something there that I learned that can be a story that I can put to a metaphor that I can then pivot into some other point of meaning? Metaphor means literally to carry over. So a story that builds to a metaphor helps you to align with your audience in a way that you can connect and bring meaning better than information alone will do. So 6 steps to memorable, retellable stories. I believe that human wisdom is a source of inspiration as important to us as water, and food. I believe that our stories truly, truly can create change in the world. And that is your stories. That is your wisdom. The fact is, though, that sometimes those old adventures get a little stuck. They are told so many times that they kind of lose their meaning. I worked with somebody who their story was told all over the New York Times and the news and was written about everywhere. And she comes to me and she says, "It's old, it's cardboard now. I'm so tired of telling this story." Everybody says, "Oh, wow, that story's so great." So you have to be responsible to go back to your own adventures. Go back in time. Look around a little bit. Look around. See what you smell. See what you hear. Is there something else that is informing a way that story can be told that's relevant to now? Engage them in the journey. That idea of considering a landing point, a metaphor that brings your audience in a more connected way into your story, so then you can deliver the information where they're open and curious. Engage them in the journey. Transformation is key. So the act of telling a story where someone thought this and now they think something slightly different is critical. And that innermost cave moment, that moment of mystery, that moment of being uncertain, is actually the catalytic material to bring that transformation. Sometimes we say, well, I don't want to share about not knowing. I don't have time to share about not knowing. But even just a little bit, even just that 15 seconds. What's the biggest island in Japan? Hokkaido. A little bit of the not telling, even when somebody's saying, I want to know this really, I want to know it as quickly as you've got it. Well, that's fine. You can tell it as quickly as you've got it, but it'll be forgotten. Don't forget to elevate out. It's not just about getting into that problem, into that challenge. You have to think about what was the way from that challenge into that insight. Don't just go to the insight. If you just go straight to that insight, it's boring. It can sound a little bit like you're puffed up, like, hey, I know what happened. Let me just tell you about how great this is. But that's not actually what this is. This is about showing the challenge and then bringing them out into the lesson. The lesson is what anchors the change. Telling better stories means being a better listener. And that means sometimes you might be hearing a story that you feel like you've heard before, or that you're kind of tired of, or you're wanting somebody to get to the point. But if you listen on a deeper level and you share that compassion of how hard it is to actually tell a story in a way that gives meaning, that informs someone, that creates that shift in a conversation, by listening deeply, always listening deeply. And sometimes that listening might be going to a cafe and listening for stories. That's one of my favorite hobbies. Land your meaning. When I hear stories, I ask 10 different ways. I ask, what is the meaning of this? And I might not ask it outwardly. I might just be asking myself, why is this so important right now? Why is this so important? And we don't always know, but when you can get a hold of that key component, that last piece, and you can offer that, then you can also play with the story and play with the way of connecting with your audience that can change the entire game. Revive your adventures. Engage them in the journey. Transformation is key. Elevate out, listen deeply, and land your meaning. So I was stuck on the Sydney Harbor Bridge. And I could not move my arms, and I was scared. I kept telling myself, it's okay, you're an adventurer now, this is travel, it has an edge, it's like this sometimes, but I was scared. And I want to tell you that something strange happened to me in that moment of fear. And what it was something entirely not American in my experience. Because if it was in America, people would be jumping off the bridge and screaming, and there'd be shoulder fights. People would be going nuts. But what happened was people started laughing. My ribs were starting to get crushed, and the Aussies around me were laughing. They said, this is such a funny moment. When does this ever happen? And people can't move, and there's 100,000 of us, and we can't, and they're singing footy songs. And we sat there for 45 minutes, and we could not move. But that spirit, that openness that I experienced on that day is something that's been confirmed over and over again as I've traveled around the world. And that is that the Australian sense and spirit of adventure and the willingness to take a difficult moment and find openness and humor and connection is very, very rare. And I want to say to you, in this moment of not knowing, that spirit is something that not only is going to get you through this, but it's actually what's gotten you here. Through all of the challenges that you've faced as an industry, and also all of the challenges that you faced as individuals. All those moments, all those stories that you did not tell today about getting through, all those things that you faced on an individual level, the medicine in those stories is the same medicine that makes it possible to make your way through. And it also is what makes a greater story, that in a year's time, when we look back because we've made our way around the sun one more time, it's going to be the power of those stories and your capability to tell them on an individual level and recognize them on a collective level and make them into a greater story together that's going to make your way through, that's going to help you get through this challenge. And so I just wanted to come and share with you a little bit of a way to see your own life, to gather your own stories, and to see everybody else in this room, because you are all working together on a greater story. And it's an immense honor for me to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. What a perfect way to finish today. Jay, I've got a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind.
Please.
Before we do finish. I'd really like to know, and you touched a little bit on your presentation, but your own personal story behind this and how storytelling became so important to you and has put you into this career path.
So there's a little bit of conversation about the recession of 2008-9. During that time, we had our second child, and I looked up and realized that I had spent 13 years traveling through the edge of internet media in San Francisco. After years of travel and exploring the wonder of stories of people that I met around the world, and something about all of the different new forms of media still hadn't captured the essence of a really good travel story. And I felt like that was something that was missing in leadership and in everyone I spoke to, that there must be an opportunity to help people to tell better stories. So I kind of gave up being the internet media guy and came back to, gave up the technology and came back more to the knowledge-y part.
Great. I want to ask a question around the biggest mistake businesses make when trying to tell their business story. And I also want to know, is one of those mistakes helping people to land it? And how do you go about that?
Great question. I think that one of the mistakes that businesses make in telling stories is not getting clear on what we mean by a story. That's why I kind of go through this process to say, can we just get clear on terms? Because there's a lot of different ways to talk about what a story is. But if we talk about a problem approached in an interesting way that makes us care, or if we talk about delivering on a critical change that takes us into a new insight that connects us with our audience, if we start to get those terms down, then it helps us to tell better stories. And from a business perspective, the other mistake that I think that people make is they're not stories about people. And that's one of the rich opportunities that you have as in Australian tourism. There's so many people that have gone through incredible experiences that you have to share over and over again. So I'd say that, I mean, this is a big topic, the mistakes that businesses make, but I'd say get clear on your terms of what we mean by story. I'd say consider using the journey curve, those 3 pivots in any story that you tell, and really make them about human transformation, human change. And it's not just a case study, it's not just this person went there, it's a deep and personal shift because we can all connect to that.
And not to waffle and to land it. What's one tip you've got around that?
Remember your last line. If you forget everything, remember this is for speaking, remember your last line. And really think as you approach your audience, ask these 2 questions. I ask these 2 questions. It's for speaking, but I really feel like it's any story. Where are they? Meaning, what do they care about? What's happening in this moment? What do they care most about? And where am I? Meaning, what's going on with me? How do I feel? What do I have to really offer on this day? And from that, come up with your journey and your last line, and that way you know how to get off the stage when it's time to go. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Jay. It has been wonderful that you've taken the time to come down under. Thank you so much for sharing. And if you want more, you've got fabulous books, so we can look and read your books and find out all your incredible information and learn more. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your time down under. Thank you.